Welcome everyone back to Tales from the 90s. If you're new here, thanks for joining us. If you're returning, thank you for listening to my ramblings and deciding you want more. Anyway, we're going to go back to a simpler time, as we always do here, and talk about everything that was going on. So jump in your 1997 Toyota Camry or whatever you drove then or rode in, and let's go back in time.
Wars and morning yawns. Play kickball in the street. Man, those days can't be beat. Tales from the 90s never die.
Alright guys, this week, and by the way, when I started it off with the 1997 Toyota Camry, full disclosure, I was just looking to see what the top selling car of the year was. I don't think I've ever even been in a Toyota Camry. Usually it was some old piece of crap that Marky Foe was driving around, like his old giant metal looking thing he called the sled that probably could double as a tank in World War II. But anyway, and you probably just heard the air conditioner kick on. I'm not taking that off. I'm sure you can hear my annoying self ramble on as I do. But we're going to be going back in time to April of 1997. Now, again, full disclosure, I'm not doing this podcast linear because last week we were in November of 94. Now we're in April of 97. I put years in a randomizer, random.org. It's a nice site to check out if you like to just put in things random. You can get random numbers, put in a random list, because I don't like to do things like down the line right in order sometimes. I'm weird. I like to have everything kind of keeps it from being just monotonous and boring. But anyway, we are going back in time to April 1997. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to a podcast that'll be coming soon. It's going to be, Throwing Shade with Andy Shades. Make sure you check that out. That'll be on everywhere, Facebook, YouTube. It's going to be on TikTok Live as well. You never know what you're going to get on that podcast. I'm waiting for that one. If you ever need a guest on there, I've got some wonderful things we can talk about. Some announcers I can mention. But anyway, I also want to give a shout out. Coincidentally, like I said, I picked this date at random. It's was the birth month and year for Mackenzie Shades. So shout out to you. You were born that month, and anybody else born that month. If you want to comment down there, I mean, a lot of people watching this are probably my age or born before then, but I mean, if that was your birth month, let me know. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna get started. We talk about different things on here: sports, TV, music, just anything that was going on, and I try to give my little personal spin on it. Let you know some things that were going on with me, because if this was just a podcast of talking about my life and my experiences, only less than 10 people would even know what I'm talking about. So that's why I include all this other stuff, because I want to try to make sure that anybody that either lived through that time or wants to know what it was like in that time can get a little bit of experience with it. So we're going to start out with, as you can't see back here, talking about Tales from the Crypt, because I mean that's where I got the basis of the name of this podcast. Actually, Tales from the Crypt was canceled at this point, the TV show, and the cartoon had done 2 seasons, and they had got canceled and were brought back like a couple years later in '99. So the only Tales from the Crypt I was watching at this time was that syndication, midnight to 1 Saturday nights, and we never missed that, of course. But during this time, they actually had another Tales from the Crypt property going on. It was a game show Saturday mornings called Secrets of the Crypt Keeper's Haunted House. This thing was awesome. It only ran a season, and you can't find everything on YouTube. You can find a couple episodes that, like, I think people were on and they uploaded. But this show was crazy. You'd have the Crypt Keeper doing segments, and you'd have to go through these different challenges. Kind of a Survivor type thing. Or maybe a Nickelodeon, like Legends of the Hidden Temple would be more like that. But you got to face off with the Crypt Keeper's challenges in his house. Man, if there was one show I wanted to go on as a kid, that was certainly that. Yeah, like I said, not a lot going on in the Tales from the Crypt world then. They'd gotten canceled after the not 97, the 7th season, which most people don't like the 7th season. It was filmed all in England. I don't know if they did it to save money or what, or the production just moved there, but the quality wasn't as good, and because of that, they got canceled, unfortunately. But, yeah, that's Tales from the Crypt. Pretty much the only thing going on was that game show. Wrestling at the time, though, I said in the last video, the end of 94 was kind of the start of the downtime in wrestling, but you want to talk about a complete 180 or maybe even a 360. Wrestling in 97 was starting to heat up. We would be a little bit before what they consider the Attitude Era, but the building signs were there. I mean, WCW, the NWO had landed there the year before in 96, so things were definitely heating up. Speaking of WCW, Spring Stampede was their pay-per-view that month. The main event saw the rise of DDP to like a main event level superstar. He defeated Macho Man, no disqualification match in the main event. That definitely, you watch any interviews, DDP, him and Macho Man, DDP turned down the NWO, and because everybody was joining them, they gave this ultimatum: either you join the NWO or we're going to attack you. So everybody's joining left and right, and of course that's what led to the downfall of NWO, was too many people joining. But DDP, he was a heel, so everybody expected him to join, but he held off, and then finally tore off that NWO shirt and gave diamond cutters to everybody, and it was off from there. Spring Stampede is also okay, let me try to talk now. Infamously known, if that's even a word, for the famous Booker T promo. Hulk Hogan, we coming. I ain't doing it. I ain't getting banned from YouTube. Just look it up, or you probably already know what he said. But also in that month, Ultimo Dragon defeated Prince Iaukea for the TV title. And those two names that don't get talked about enough. I know Prince Iaukea kind of turned out to be a flop, I guess. But I mean, when I was watching then, I was like, it's Prince Iaukea. He's cool. He does flips. He doesn't wrestle with shoes on. I mean, what do you know then? I mean, your favorites are your favorites when you watch wrestling. You know, it doesn't have to be the big names, the Hogan, the Stone Cold. I mean, your favorites can be guys that most people never heard of. Kind of like in music, I'm the same way. I'll go on and on about artists from the 90s that people never even heard of. But yeah, Ultimo Dragon, that's another one. Man, I remember him at the time. He had like 9 belts at once from Japan and all these other promotions. I was like, this guy's got 9 belts. How's anybody gonna ever lose to him? But yeah, that TV title, that was big in WCW. That was literally defended almost every TV show. I remember it was a 15 or 20 minute time limit, but the champion would usually get away with the time running out. And yeah, that was a pretty cool title that a lot of places don't have anymore. Because obviously, I mean, unless you're on TV in the WWE, I don't know why they don't have a TV title. They got every other title. But I talked about ECW then, their show not being on pay-per-view. This was actually the first ever ECW pay-per-view, was in April of 97. Barely legal. They finally got the companies convinced to let them on pay-per-view, and that was certainly a huge night. Of course, the feud with Sabu and Taz culminated that night. Those two have been feuding for years. I mean, there was some real backstage stuff going on between the two. They did not like each other legitimately, and it showed in the ring. They finally got it on with each other that night, and same night, Eliminators defeated the Dudley Boys for the ECW tag team titles. Man, the Eliminators were a cool team. I wish they could have gone further. Cronus and Saturn, that finishing move they had, total elimination. And of course, talk about tag team finishers. The Dudley Boys will probably go down as one of the greatest tag teams of all time. The 3D. Yeah, but the main event actually was kind of like a 2-part or 3-part, the Sabu and Taz match. But Terry Funk had to go on to defeat the Sandman and Stevie Richards in a 3-way dance, as they called him in ECW. And he ended up facing, Raven. for the ECW championship and beat him, and literally as the show was going off the air, because back then, I mean, you see, what do they call them now? PLEs? They call pay-per-views now in WWE, but back then they were called pay-per-views, and they had, today they can go on 5-6 hours. You know, that's on Peacock or even on pay-per-view. They just let you go as long as you want. But back then you had to finish at a certain time or your feed's cut. So just as they were going off the air, they finished that show. Because like I said last week, ECW, they're all over the place, kind of like my ramblings. They're all over the place, and a lot of things that it seems like they do a little bit of planning, but they can't ever stick to it because, I mean, they weren't a big company like the WWF or the WCW. They didn't have the production values and the knowledge and all the technology that they could pull off a show and get it like right where you need it to be. But anyway, speaking of WWF, it just come off WrestleMania 13 the month prior to this, and I mean, if you look at 13 and 14, that's a world of difference. 13 was when Undertaker defeated Psycho Sid for the WWF title. Of course, the next year you would have Austin go to the top, and I mean, that's when the huge explosion started. But WWF's pay-per-view of April was called Revenge of the Taker. So, wonder who's going to be featured in this show. The Undertaker ended up defeating Mankind. He was, like I said, the WWF champion. He retained his title. And also on the same show, Stone Cold would defeat Bret Hart by disqualification to earn a shot at the title in the future. And then, I guess the only other notable thing going on this month, Owen Hart would defeat Rocky Maivia, as he knows now, The Rock. Rocky Maivia for the Intercontinental title on Raw. And, yeah, back then, it was a little more commonplace to win the titles on shows like Raw and not SmackDown. SmackDown wasn't then, but Raw and Nitro. It's a little more common than it is now. I mean, now when it happens, it's a huge deal. But back then, there are some titles you see change hands every other week. So that was wrestling then. We're going to go on to a new future. There ain't going to be no future to this podcast. I keep fumbling with my stupid words. But we're going to go to a new feature now. We're going to be talking about different toys, because I was talking with my wife about doing a bonus episode. Especially, speaking of bonus episodes, we're going to have a bonus episode coming up to you October 31st. I call it a bonus episode because I'm going to be talking about a few things that weren't just in the 90s. This is just going to be a top 50 list, and I'll get into the criteria of my list, because it's just my list. It's not the greatest movies of all time. It's just my top 50 of the top horror movies of all time, and that's actually going to come out Halloween Day, probably in the morning. Like this one drops at 9 in the morning. This will probably be out then. As I said, it's a bonus episode. But anyway, I was talking with my wife about different bonus episodes we could do. We're talking about doing one on just the toys that we had in the 90s, because I mean, man, that was a different time with different toys, and I mean the 80s as well. I mean, everybody that's grown up as a kid, you have those memories of the toys that you had when you were then. I mean, whether it was the old days, just Lincoln Logs, or nowadays when you get these, I mean, do they even have toys anymore? They just give out cell phones for Christmas. I don't know how it goes anymore. I don't have any kids that are like kid age now, so if any of you do, let me know what, do they still have toys? I see them at the store, but I don't see anybody buying them. But anyway, I'm not going to go through all of them, and like I said, I'm going to save my favorites for that bonus episode, and that'll probably come out next month. I was thinking about maybe doing it for Black Friday, because I already talked about Thanksgiving last month, so I was thinking everybody goes out going nuts on Black Friday for their toys and stuff, so we'll save that for them. But we're going to talk about the top selling toys of April '97. Of course, the biggest the one that made the most money, not the one that sold the most units, but the one that made the most money was Tickle Me Elmo. If you didn't live through this time, you won't be able to fully understand the Tickle Me Elmo craze. I mean, people were punching each other out in department stores trying to get this Tickle Me Elmo. It was just a stupid toy where you tickle it and it laughs. I mean, you wouldn't think that people go that nuts over it, but I mean, Sesame Street was hot then. It was an interactive toy. People went nuts. But yeah, that was the one that made the most money. The most units sold, and it's probably going to be the same on every feature I do on every episode. Was the most units sold was Hot Wheels, for sure. I mean, everybody bought Hot Wheels. You would buy them. They weren't that expensive then, and you buy a bunch at a time. And whether you were one of the rich kids that had the fancy track or the garage and all the accessories, or you're like me, my mom literally took paper bags from the stores, because yes, we used mostly paper bags then, and she would literally make me a whole town on a paper bag. You know, draw a street, and then there would be a store here, and I would just hours all day. I mean, when I was little, not in 1997. By the way, I forgot to mention I was 13 that year, April 97. But yeah, I probably wasn't playing with Hot Wheels then. But yeah, she would make this whole town on a paper bag, and it was just like the coolest thing ever to me. And I mean, if I had showed people at school, they would have made fun of me, like, you don't have the Hot Wheels garage or the this and that. Like, no, we're poor. I mean, we weren't poor, but you know, we definitely weren't upper class, that's for sure. But yeah, everybody had Hot Wheels. Other things that were hot on then were Power Wheels. Of course, I never got to have a Power Wheels. I think I rode in one once or twice. If you don't know what Power Wheels are, they're those like little vehicles for kids. You get in them, they have those big batteries you got to charge, and they'd either resemble a Jeep or just whatever, and you would just drive it down the street. Well, not in the street. Well, we did as kids whenever we got on one. Kind of stupid, but yeah, that was Power Wheels. I'm pretty sure they still have those, and of course Star Wars figures were big then. No, I'm gonna say something to make everybody turn this off. I am not a Star Wars fan. The only Star Wars stuff I've watched is the Baby Yoda show. And yes, I call it the Baby Yoda show. It's the Mandalorian. I know there's definitely people in wrestling that get on you when you've never seen Star Wars, never seen it, never cared. That's just the way it is. But Star Wars figures were huge then, and like I said, I think Star Wars did come out with their movies in the 90s. I don't know what their names are. I don't care. Other people care. That's fine. But the Star Wars figures were a huge seller, and Star Wars Monopoly. I mean, these days they've got every Monopoly under the sun, but back then they didn't have too many variations. I remember playing a NASCAR Monopoly in like '98. That was like the coolest thing ever. But and then the other biggest selling toy was the Power Rangers Turbo Megazord. Power Rangers Turbo was on then. That was there when they got vehicles and stuff. That's kind of when they got to getting away from what they really were. I'll go into Power Rangers in detail whenever I talk about them more. But I still enjoyed Power Rangers Turbo. Of course, that was the second Power Rangers movie was Turbo. The one with the little kid taking over for the Blue Ranger. But yeah, Power Rangers were a huge seller in the 90s, especially the later 90s. But whenever I look up the list for that, they always list the top toys, not video games, because video games outsold everything then. So we'll just move into that now and talk about the video games. Not too many video games I'm familiar with that came out then, and most of them were actually computer games, but April 97 is known for something coming out that would... I mean, there's a lot of things in the 90s that changed video games for the future, but April 97 is whenever the first ever PlayStation DualShock controller came out. Now, the DualShock controller was the first one that came out with those two analog sticks on it. And, I mean, today that's like... Well, how could you not have a controller without that? But, I mean, up until then, you just had the D-pad, up, down, left, right. And those analog controllers came out, and it was like a world of difference. You could do a lot more than you could do, and it really helped advance video games on. But yeah, that's when that first controller came out, because the first PlayStation controller didn't have the analogs. But, I mean, moving forward, they came out with the controller, and then they started designing games that would run with that controller, take full advantage of it. But it was a sad time in this history, because Sega Genesis and Sega Game Gear were discontinued. Of course, the Sega Saturn had come out, and that ultimately would be a flop. I never actually got to play it during the time. I had one later on. It was kind of okay. I kind of liked the music player that was on it. It was the first Sega that took discs. And it kind of, like I said, kind of ended up being a flop. But they discontinued the Genesis, and that system, along with the Super Nintendo, were, if you look throughout the history and people were objective and experienced every system, they probably say that those two systems were probably two of the best. They were certainly two of the longest running and had the most games. And of course, I mean, comparing video game systems is subjective. People are like, oh, the original Nintendo's the best. But I mean, does it hold up graphically and the things you can do on it? Or some of the PS5's the best? Yeah, but how many games do you have that you have to download, or you have to have the internet connection, or do you have to subscribe to this to get it, or it costs this and you don't even get the whole game, you got to download? That's a whole rant to go into another time. But anyway, I'm just saying, your love of video games, just like music, wrestling, anything, it's all subjective to you. That's why I do this podcast, because there's going to be people who are going to be like, you like this? Yeah, I like this. You like that? I probably don't like what you like, but we all like what we like, and that's the point of this podcast, is to go back and give my experiences with it. I mean, I hope I inspire somebody to do their own podcast where they take on all these things and give their spin on it. I'll definitely watch and subscribe. I mean, you put the link in this, and I'll definitely subscribe, because I like to see everybody else's experiences, because it might trigger a memory in me I don't remember. But the games that were released this month was Outlaws. It was a first-person shooter on PC. I've never heard of it. We didn't have a computer that. Well, we had a computer, but the extent of games on that was Minesweeper and Solitary. Played those all the time. But yeah, I don't have any experience with PC games during this time. Another one was Fighters Mega Mix for Sega Saturn. Like I said, I never had much experience with Sega Saturn. But the one game on this list that I do have some experience, well, at least watching, is Redneck Rampage for Windows PC. Shout out to Steve, Stepdad Steve. He played this game when we moved in with him in '99. He was playing this game on computer, and it was so hilarious. These rednecks were running around, cussing each other out, shooting each other. That game was so hilarious. I'm sure a couple of you remember that one, Redneck Rampage. But now last month, it was only a week ago, so it feels like a month ago. Last week on our podcast, when we were talking about November of '94, we gave the Sunday morning, or the whole day lineup of Nickelodeon content. This time I wanted to do a little bit different. I wanted to go into the Saturday morning cartoon lineup, because, I mean, that's the one that everybody remembers from whatever time period you're from. If you were a kid, you were probably watching Saturday morning cartoons. So I want to go this week, and actually I haven't looked at the list, because I kind of want to just give my reactions upon seeing things. Hopefully my computer's not going to be stupid and slow and take forever to load up like it always does. But we're going to look at April 5th of 1997. Now, I don't know, I haven't looked. The site that I'm on, it's like a wiki, fandom, whatever it's called, where people put in the stuff. So I don't know if it's 100% accurate, or it may have been a different lineup. Oh, if you see this weird shadow over my face, I can't do nothing about it. It's a stupid light. Probably ain't looking at my face anyway. And if you're listening to this on Spotify, you're definitely not looking at my face. But we're just going to go through the list. They had cartoons on from ABC, Fox, and the WB. Like I said, what you watched then may have been different because of syndication. But and a lot of these cartoons I've never heard of. Like on ABC, we started off at 8 in the morning with Jungle Cubs. I never watched that or heard of it. Then from 8:30 to 9:30, we get Disney's Doug. I talked about Doug last week. This is when Disney had purchased them from Nickelodeon, and I don't remember there being many differences. Like, I think it was basically like the same cartoon, because it was the same people behind it. I don't think they Disney-fied it, where Disney ruins a lot of things with some of the stuff they do. I mean, I don't want to get on a rant here, but if you've ever seen the original Boy Meets World, And then you watch Girl Meets World, it's just, ugh. I watched the show because it had the characters in it from Boy Meets World, but it was just, I do not like Disney kids shows from 2000s on, I'll tell you right now. A lot of you are going to hate me for that. But anyway, next at 9:30, because if you haven't noticed, ABC and Disney, I don't know if they were together then or if they were just partners. I'm pretty sure they were together then. Disney bought ABC at some point. But anyway, 9:30 was the Mighty Ducks cartoon. Of course, based on the Mighty Ducks movies. The cartoon was fun. It was actual ducks. I don't have too many memories of that. I know I watched a few episodes, but I couldn't tell you the character names. And from 10 to 11, we got the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show. Again, kind of like with the Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon, it was, you know, Bugs Bunny, Tweety, all those characters. And then 11 o'clock, I never seen this show, Bone Chillers, but I've seen the books. I always thought they were kind of rip-offs of Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of... Not Are You Afraid of the Dark. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. But I've never seen the Bone Chillers show. Maybe I should watch that. I think it said there was this whole season of it. I think they only went one season. Maybe I should watch that. They said it was kind of like Goosebumps, and I definitely like Goosebumps. But coming on 11:30 was Gargoyles. I love this cartoon. It was different cartoon for Disney. It was darker. You know, it was the Gargoyles come alive at night. I remember Goliath was their leader. And that was just a good cartoon. And then Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which I never watched. My wife was obsessed with Tigger. I'm sure she watched this one. But we'll go over to Fox. Sea Bear and Jamal at 8 o'clock. I don't remember that, or don't even remember hearing that. 8:30, Big Bad Beetleborgs. I watched this briefly. I think it was made by the same people that made Power Rangers. But I don't have, like I said, some of these I have a lot of memories of them. Some of them like, oh yeah, I remember that one, but I don't remember watching much of it. But 9 o'clock, Spider-Man the Animated Series. I'll give another reason here for you to stop watching me. I don't like all the superhero movies. The DC, the Marvel, I don't even know if I'm leaving out names. The 500, Spider-Man, Wolverine, Deadpool, this versus this, and Superman versus his grandma's sister's Aqua Dog. I don't know. I do not like them. They're repetitive to me. I'm sure I'm probably missing out. If I watched it, I might like it, but it's just not my type of thing. So, but I did watch the Spider-Man the Animated Series, and it's not on this list because I guess it wasn't on at this time. But I did watch X-Men and the Batman cartoons, which I'll talk about later on. I don't want to get into them now because I want to kind of save them. Batman the Animated Series, that was one of my favorites. But I did watch Spider-Man the Animated Series a little. The Spooktacular New Adventures of Casper at 9:30. I don't think I've seen that one. I've seen the Casper cartoon that was on in the 90s. That thing was hilarious. And at 10 in the morning, Goosebumps. And on this particular day, the Cuckoo Clock of Doom. That was definitely an episode I remember. About the kid turning the cuckoo clock around backwards, and then he went back in time and eventually became a baby and had to go to the store where the clock was sold to get back to himself, or he was going to basically not exist because he kept going younger and younger and younger. That was definitely a good episode. But I mean, Goosebumps, that might be a whole episode on that show. And then 10:30, one that don't get talked about much anymore, is Erie, Indiana. It wasn't on too long. It was like a creepy show about this town in Indiana named Erie where they moved to, and just all these weird things happen. 11 o'clock, Life with Louie. Oh my. That was a cartoon that was hilarious. Louis Anderson created it. It's supposed to be about his life as a kid. Kind of like what I was talking about last week with Bobby's World, was like Howie Mandel's life. This is Louie's life. I don't know how much of his like true stories or how much, because it was so bizarre. But the one episode where Louis would always whine like this. He would always, and he was the famous line that I'll say all the time to my brothers: "Cats lick the butter." If you don't know it, that's kind of like an inside thing. But yeah, Life with Louie was so hilarious. Oh, no, I was wrong. X-Men the animated series was on at 11:30. I would watch that all the time. Like I said, I don't care about any of those superhero movies now. Like, I'll watch Batman from the 60s all the time. I'll watch the Batman movies from the 90s, but I don't know. Maybe I'm stuck back in the 90s. It's a good thing I'm doing this show. But finally, we're going to go to the WB, which was another network that was on. And in our town in Cincinnati, they change channels all the time. It'd be on this channel this week, and a few months later, this channel will buy the rights to it. And they became like different networks over the years. I think they're the CW now or whatever. But anyway, we'll go through a few things they had. Daffy Duck Show. I don't remember that specifically, but I'm pretty sure it was another, just like a Looney Tunes type cartoon where they'd have different characters from that. And then 8:30 Animaniacs. That show was crazy. That cartoon was crazy. Yakko, Wacko, and Dot. The two brothers and the one sister that lived in the WB tower that they let out and went crazy. And of course, Animaniacs was also known for where Pinky and the Brain came from. That was a part of their cartoon till they got their own cartoon. But yeah, those are some crazy cartoons. And the Superman the animated series, I've watched a little bit of that too, not a whole lot. Road Rovers, I don't remember that one. Or Wanehead, I don't think I've ever heard of that. There's Pinky and the Brain, 10:30, and then Animaniacs back on at 11, and then we end with 11:30 with Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries. I don't think I've seen that one. I think they were trying to do too much with the Looney Tunes back then. They needed their own mystery show. But yeah, that's just a few things from like April 5th, 1997, the Saturday morning cartoons. Those were some of the best times. And I mean, I was surprised to find Power Rangers wasn't on this day. Maybe their season had ended or something. But yeah, you could always find Power Rangers usually on then. And that Tales from the Crypt Keeper Haunted House, or the Secrets of the Crypt Keeper's Haunted House, I should say, was on then. It just wasn't on this date. So I try to pick something different every time, so that way I'm not like, oh, this episode again? But yeah, I'm trying to pick something different, so that we give you guys a little more variety. We're going to move on from that to TV shows. And each week, the order of stuff I talk about is not going to be the same. Like last week, I think I talked about news items first, and this week I'm not talking about it till later. I do have a basic lineup of what I'm saying. I don't have a script, and as you can tell, if I did, I'd be a lot more articulate. But I just have an outline of what I want to talk about. Otherwise, if I just sit here, I'll talk for 7 hours rambling on. Last week I said I try to keep this podcast at a half hour and end up being an hour. Hopefully this one is an hour or less. But we're talking about some TV shows that debuted this month. Or not this month, but this year. It's kind of hard to find exactly when shows debuted, because there's a lot of different things, whether it came out on this day or whether they're talking about the day it was produced. But this is just a few shows that came out in 97, and these are some pretty big shows. I'm going to start off with South Park. I never got to watch South Park then. I probably didn't start until about 1999, but everybody knows South Park. And they were, once that cartoon came out, it was on Comedy Central. It still is. It's still going to this day. But once that came out, everybody was quoting in the school, and I didn't know what they're talking about. But they were saying some pretty outlandish things in middle school where I was at the time. Oh, by the way, yeah, I was in middle school. I was in my second year of 7th grade. That's a whole other story of its own. Yes, I failed the 7th grade because I didn't do nothing. There was a lot going on, and I kind of checked out from school. I was becoming more obsessed with wrestling. I was bringing wrestling magazines to school. Another story to come. But, yeah, it was my second year of 7th grade. And it actually would have been a third year if they didn't let me go to summer school that year. Which, I got out of that. But yeah, that was my second year of 7th grade. But everybody was quoting South Park, and I didn't know what they were talking about. And I finally got to watch it later on, and I just couldn't believe the stuff they let on TV. Everybody knows South Park. I mean, everybody has a quote from it. I've got a CD, Chef Aid, the South Park soundtrack, that I play all the time. Shout out if you know what Salty Chocolate Balls stands for. That's probably the most well-known song from that CD. But King of the Hill also debuted this year. It was another cartoon it wasn't anywhere near South Park, but they were a little more advanced than like your Mickey Mouse. King of the Hill, that show is hilarious. I heard that they're supposed to be coming back. I hope they bring that back. That was made by the creators of Beavis and Butthead. I've never watched that because, like I said with music, I was strictly country, so of course I didn't watch Beavis and Butthead. They were always talking about the rock songs on there, and frankly, it's going to make a lot of people mad. I found Beavis and Butthead just completely stupid. I know it was supposed to be stupid, but it was just... There's a lot of you that loved it, though, so I'm not going to... if I crap on something you love, I'm not trying to insult anybody. I'm sure there's stuff that I love that you'd crap all over, too. I said, all this stuff is subjective. But yeah, that was King of the Hill. Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction. And that was a creepy show where they would present these stories and you'd have to guess. It was kind of an interactive thing before its time, because you'd have to guess whether you thought the story was true, based on true events or completely made up. And some of the stories you get to the end to find out that they were based on... I still don't know to this day whether they actually happened. They're supposed to be based on true events by the author of the... I guess there was it Robert Traylan's, I think his name was? Traylan, something. But anyway, he apparently wrote a bunch of books with these odd stories, and they were apparently true. The one I'll always remember, the one about the gravedigger. An awful, awful man, not well bred. No respect for anyone, not even the dead. That'll scare one person watching this if she's watching. But that one creeped me out. It was a story about a gravedigger who was just mean to everybody, and he would hit people that worked for him with a shovel, and he literally had no respect for the dead. And he was visited by this old woman, and that was singing that song that I just sung, and she ended up coming back later on. You could hear her singing from the grave, so he uncovered the coffin, which he told the people to bury it upside down. But he opened the coffin, and she's in there, like, opens her eyes, and he has a heart attack and dies. I found out that story was supposed to be true. That freaked me out. But yeah, Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction. You can find that on on all the different things, like I think Pluto, or if you have Google Smart TV, it's on free everywhere. You can find. I don't know if you can find it on YouTube or not, but check out some of those. Those are pretty cool to watch. And like I said, I already kind of discussed Power Rangers Turbo. That was the series that was going on. Yeah, I had that to talk about. Then I realized I talked about that in toys, but yeah, Power Rangers was definitely a huge part of my life. I watched the very first episode, and I really got out of it once I got to space. Like everything else, once you take your movie or your series to space, I'm kind of checking out. It's gone too far. But final one I want to talk about is Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation. I still haven't finished this series. I think it's 1 or 2 seasons. But it's the one where it's the live action Turtles, but it's a TV show where they had kind of the weird masks on. And they introduced a 5th turtle. I think it was Venus de Milo. It was a girl. And they did a crossover with Power Rangers, but yeah, it was something that I didn't watch a whole lot of because I kind of thought it was weird. It wasn't my Ninja Turtles cartoon of the 80s and 90s, or my Ninja Turtle movies, 1, 2, and 3. There's a lot of debate whether 3 was a good movie or not. I like it. I guess that's kind of their going to space moment when they went to Japan and went back in time. But yeah, Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation. If you haven't seen that, check it out. It's strange. I think it was produced by Saban, who did Power Rangers. But we're going to quickly go through the movies that were released, because I actually have never seen any of these movies, so it's not like I can give you my experience with them. The biggest one that I remember hearing about and I know was popular was Spawn. I've never seen that. And then a few other movies. Inventing the Abbotts, never even heard of that. Anna Karina, I've heard of that but never seen it. Chasing Amy, Murder at 1600, and Volcano. Like I said, not a lot going on in movies that month that I know about. But I do kind of want to talk about one movie that I watched. Like, if I had to guess a number, I would say thousands of times. And I'm not exaggerating. My brothers will tell you, because this involves them. Coming to America. Now, again, this isn't a 90s movie. It came out in 1988. But this was a movie that we watched all the time. A little backstory on it. It was left there by our babysitter. I think her name was Nicole. She was the daughter of one of our Mom and Marky Foe's friends. But she would babysit us when they'd go out to the bars and didn't take us. I talked about that last week. But, yeah, she left this tape behind, and we were just bored, I guess. Probably one of the times we didn't have cable. We decided to put it on just to see what it was. Because, I mean, if you look at the box of the tape, and it says Coming to America, you're just like, couldn't even tell if it was a comedy or what. But we put this tape on, and I tell you, when we got through with it, we couldn't hit that rewind button quick enough. This movie is maybe my favorite movie of all time. Certainly my favorite comedy movie of all time. There is so much going on with this movie. Eddie Murphy stars in it, of course, and he does all these different characters. The most famous is the barbershop scenes. Those are so hilarious. You must be out of your mind! I'm trying not to cuss in this video. But it's kind of hard to talk about Coming to America without cussing. Yeah, Eddie Murphy played Prince Akeem, who was supposed to get married to this woman. He was having her jump around and bark like a dog just to see if she would do it, because she was literally... They're from this... I should mention, if you've never seen this, they're from this country called Zamunda, which I'm pretty sure isn't real. I wish it was, but because I would definitely visit. But, yeah, he was the prince, and his dad was played by James Earl Jones. He was King Jaffe Jaffa, ruler of Zamunda. That was a horrible accent. But, yeah, the Prince Akeem, Eddie Murphy's character, was supposed to marry this woman who was trained literally from birth to like everything that he did, and he didn't want to marry her. He wanted to marry somebody that he got along with, not just someone this is the person you're marrying. So he decides to go to America, and he's like, where do we pick a place to find someone? I should say Arsenio Hall was saying that. Arsenio Hall played Simi, his I guess his best friend, and his I don't know if he exactly had a title, but he was his best friend. He was like, where do we find a woman with beauty and grace good enough for a king? And they look at the map. Queens. So they go to Queens, New York. And while he's there, he doesn't want to stand out to be a king, because he don't want people to fall in love with him for his money or his status. He wants someone to fall in love with him. So they go to Queens, the poorest section in New York, apparently. And then they go to this apartment that's like, it's got a chalk outline where the blind guy was beat to death, and his dog's outlines on there. And they only go in one bathroom this floor, so you're going to have to share it. Again, my accents are horrible trying to do this movie. And they walk in, and this guy falls down the steps. Hey, Stoop, your rent's due, mother... Like I said, I'm trying not to cuss. But then they go to this barber shop, and Eddie Murphy's playing this one barber. And then Arsenio Hall's playing another, and then they got this other guy, which I found out is Eddie Murphy's childhood friend, to play the other barber. And then there's this white guy, this overly Jewish guy that Eddie Murphy plays. And if you watch this for the first time, you would not know it's Eddie Murphy. The makeup is so well done in this movie, and his accent is... Wait a second, a man has a right to change his name to what he wants to change it to. In a free country, if a man wants to be called Muhammad Ali, spam it. I said spam it, so I didn't have to say the other word. Like I said, I'm trying not to cuss because I don't want to get these videos all demonetized. Not that I ain't going to get any money from them, but yeah, this movie was so hilarious. We were like, why do we never watch this? And there's so many quotable things. I was talking about Life with Louie. Louis Anderson was in it. He worked at not McDonald's, McDowell's. He and Akeem ends up finding this woman he falls in love with, who works for her father, who runs this restaurant called McDowell's. He was literally ripping off McDonald's. He has the manual at one point. He's looking at it and he hides it, like trying to say, like, they don't have the Big Mac, they have the Big Mick. They don't have the golden arches, they have the golden arcs. But yeah, this guy thought he was some big shot rich guy until he found out who Akeem really was. Like, literally, Akeem has his own money. He's got his face on it. But anyway, Louis worked at this restaurant, and typical Louis, the way he talks. Rich guys get all the women. That whining way he talks, I find so hilarious. But anyway, if you've never seen Coming to America, go watch it. They actually came out with Coming to America 2 a couple years ago. It was good. I've only seen it like 2 or 3 times, so I can't quote that one fully. But definitely Coming to America was the best. Like I said, it could be my favorite movie. If not, it's definitely my favorite comedy of all time. That movie. Like I said, so many things to quote from that movie. Trust me, we weren't around doing that all the time. Definitely when our parents weren't around, because we weren't saying that stuff in front of them, but we were reenacting whole scenes, like doing the whole barbershop scene. But yeah, that's some of the stuff we did to entertain ourselves. Like I said, at that time, I checked out of school. I was still in school, but I was obsessed with wrestling. So much so that I would start wrestling at school. Of course, back then, I didn't know the ins and outs of wrestling. So, me and my one friend, I can't remember this guy's name because he was only at school for like a year or two. He had moved there and then he moved away. I don't know if his family was military or if they moved around a lot. But this kid, me and him would wrestle. We were friends, but we would try to beat each other. We thought wrestling is you got to try to make each other tap out or you got to pin. And we would literally wrestle all the time. Nobody would ever win because I wasn't giving up. He wasn't giving up. So I don't think we actually tried, because we didn't try to hurt each other like snap a bone type hurt each other, because we were friends. So we were just trying to make each other tap out, but we wouldn't go so far that we would legitimately break something on somebody. But we would wrestle all the freaking time. We went to this year-end field trip to this big park, and we were wrestling in the woods. Of course, we had to do it away from the teachers because they would freaking tell you to stop wrestling. But I remember we had this match that everybody, we actually had a crowd circle around us. We were outside the football field. It went over an hour and nobody had won, and finally we just reached a point where we were, I had to walk, walk a mile uphill both ways. I literally had a mile to walk home, and it was over a couple of hills, because where I was in this time, Norwood, Ohio, we didn't have buses. You had to walk to school, and it sucked and they didn't close the school for a couple inches of snow either. So you're walking in that too. You're walking in the rain. So thank God for music and headphones that. Mostly it was a radio, or later on I got a Walkman where I could play my tapes. I never had a Discman then. But thank God for that, because that mile-long walk sucked. But anyway, yeah, we eventually got to the point where we couldn't make each other give up. We couldn't pin each other. We just stopped. We never did finish our match. But I was wrestling all through different things in school. I remember in elementary school, they had those, those big batting cages, or not I don't know if it's called a batting cage. If you ever see on a Little League park, the big cage where you stand behind, we would wrestle in that. It made it like a little triangle area. So we would wrestle in that. And I remember having this big cage match, as we called it, where I did my finisher that I came up with, or I thought I did. I called it the double take. It was just a double arm DDT. Of course, I'd seen Cactus Jack doing it, but never really equated it. I came up with it as my move. But I did that to some kid on the freaking concrete. And wrestling was then banned at recess. I got so many rules and things. I'll get into kickball another time. I have to remind myself to talk about kickball, because they specifically made rules because of me in kickball that you couldn't do anymore. But then in high school, I had this hardcore match with my friend. Brian was his name. Yes, hardcore match. But I was in one of my days where I didn't want to go to school, so I pretended to be sick. And I was like, crap, I have this hardcore match. So what do? Have it the next day? No, I walk up to school after school's out with a book bag full of cookie sheets and cheese graters. This was 5-star wrestling. If you don't know what I'm talking about, 5-star wrestling is like the worst wrestling in this area. This is 5-star wrestling. Like, I could have been main eventing with Uncle Daddy. We'll have dumbass announce me. Anyway, yeah, I took that up there, and turned out that kid didn't go to school either, so I walked up there for nothing. Walked home in the rain with my book bag full of freaking homemade homeless ECW weapons. Yeah, this is a little bit of me talking about wrestling in school. Like I said, I don't want to give like the whole show be personal stories about me, or you get boring because you didn't live my life. But you did live your own life, and that's what we're going to talk about next is music. Music was, like I said, music and wrestling. That's my two things. Like I said, I didn't listen to pop or rock or rap or any of that. I listened strictly to country. But by doing research of this, I wanted to give the Billboard Top 100 songs for that month, the number one. There was one song that was number one the whole month, and due to recent events, I can't believe this. It's freaking P. Diddy, or whatever he was called then, had the number one song with Can't Nobody Hold Me Down. Which is kind of funny, because I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of people holding you down in prison right now. P. Diddy, or should I call you Pedo Daddy? Anyway, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that idiot. He's going to get what's coming to him in prison, I'm sure. But I do want to go to the country charts. Trace Adkins had a number one in April. This Ain't No Thinking Thing. That was one of his first few hits. Trace Adkins, great voice. My wife's in love with him, of course. But, yeah, great deep voice. Someone that actually did end up going on to have a pretty good career into the 2000s, because he debuted like mid to later 90s, so he had a longer shelf life. Clay Walker, who I talked about last week, had his first number one. He's got number one 2 weeks in a row this month with Rumor Has It. That was a really good song. And then George Strait, known as the king of country music. How could you not talk about him at some point during this podcast? I mean, he was just as big in the 90s as he was in the 80s, as he was in the 2000s, the 2010s, and I mean, if it wasn't for radio completely crapping all over good country, he'd be number one all the time today. But he released his album Carrying Your Love With Me that month, and his first single from that, One Night at a Time, went to number one. And then that album also contained 2 other number one singles. So yeah, it was a big month for George Strait, but I mean, that man never released a bad album, never had a time where George Strait's going away to make room for other. No, George Strait, there was no making room. He was at the top. Everybody says, has a debate of whether George Jones or George Strait's known as the king of country. I mean, it's subjective whether which one you like better. I really can't pick one which I like better, because I mean, freaking love George Jones. Freaking love George Strait. But yeah, George Strait does have the moniker, though, as King of Country. I'm going to get a drink of my 7-Up Shirley Temple pomegranate and cherry soda. That's one thing I love about these days. So many varieties of different pops. I will be talking about Surge in the future. Don't worry. That's a special place for that pop in the 90s. But, we do kind of want to talk about the news. There wasn't much going on in the news except the trial would begin for the Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh. If you don't know what the Oklahoma City bombing is, look it up. It was a bombing that happened in 1995 in Oklahoma City, obviously. This piece of crap, I can't even remember why he did it, other than he's a horrible, sadistic piece of crap. But so many lives were lost in that. That was a complete horrible tragedy. That was one of those things that they would turn on at TV at school. Those type events where, like, oh, this is something bad's happening if they're putting the TVs on in every classroom right now. But yeah, he ended up getting convicted of that trial and getting a lethal injection in 2001. That was like 4 years later, which is almost unheard of these days. You got appeals and everything else, and I mean, I'm not going to debate whether you're for or against capital punishment, but if anybody ever deserved it, it would definitely be Timothy McVeigh. Rotten hell. Anyway, try not to spend too much time on depressing things on this because I want this to be a fun look back. We're going to kind of wind up now. We're going to talk about sports. There's a lot going on in sports. Like last week I said we were talking about football because baseball had ended. This is April. Of course, everybody that follows baseball knows that's the month baseball starts. So the 1997 season started this month with a few big changes. First of all, we're going to talk about Jackie Robinson's number was retired that year for all teams. That's never been done before or since, and probably won't, although I think the number 14 should be retired by all teams. That's another matter. Of course, Pete Rose. If I get talking about that, that may be a bonus episode in the future. But, yeah, the number 42 retired by all teams. Jackie Robinson, of course, like, not... If he would have... The only thing he would have done was crossed that barrier and been the first African-American Major League Baseball player. That would be a great feat in and of itself. But, I mean, he was a great player, too. It wasn't just like they sent someone to be a first. He was a great player, and for those accomplishments and for what he did, the change that he created in baseball. I mean, look at some of the greatest players of all time. You know, baseball has definitely become a mix of different, races and stuff. I try not to get on any political topics or anything, but I mean, baseball, you couldn't have baseball look at Ken Griffey Jr., one of my favorite players of all time. If there would have been no Jackie Robinson, there would have been no Ken Griffey Jr. So anyway, they all retired his number, and speaking of Ken Griffey Jr., he convinced him on Jackie Robinson Day. I can't remember the date of that, but every year they play a game where every player wears a jersey with just 42 on the back, which is, like I said, they don't do that for any other players. Even Babe Ruth, considered one of the greatest players of all time, they haven't done that for him because that's how important Jackie Robinson was. But, yeah, also this was the first month that the Braves would be in Turner Field, which Turner Field was built specifically for the Olympics, which happened the year before in '96. And once I get on that, I have a whole bunch of memories about the '96 Olympics. There's a funny story about me going to see the Olympic torch that was coming through Cincinnati. That would be a fun one to take on. But, yeah, that was our first season there. And actually, they've moved out of there since then. I don't know why. I'd have to look more into that of why they moved so quickly. But they're in a different stadium now. But yeah, they built that stadium. I mean, when the Olympics come to town, they build things. But '97 for baseball was another first happening that time that's kind of controversial a little bit. It was the first year that interleague play started. If you don't know anything about baseball, you're separated into two leagues, the National League and the American League, and they each have their own little conferences in them, or divisions. Depending on the sport, the conferences and divisions. But yeah, you have the American League and the National League. And until then, the only times you would play against teams would be if you made the All-Star team or the World Series, where the two leagues face off for the champion. This year started interleague play, which is, like I said, is a little controversial because there's a lot of baseball purists that say interleague play shouldn't happen because it should only be for the World Series. You should only face the teams in your division. A lot of other people say that it should happen because you get to... I mean, up until then, if you're a Reds fan, like I was, obviously, this year they sucked. We were 7-19, fourth in the Central, or this month. We ended up finishing, I think, second to last. Reds in the 90s, except 1990, were not a very good team, except maybe 95. But, yeah, if we wanted to see the Yankees come to town, the only way you'd be able to see that's the World Series. Now with interleague play, that could happen. Of course, they didn't. It's not like it is today. Today, literally, this is the first year where all teams will face all other teams in the league at least once a year. But back then, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 series. If I'm wrong, correct me, please. They started out little with it, but people still didn't like interleague play. People still don't today. My opinion on it, I kind of like it. I wish that there would be more emphasis on, because now with every team playing every team, you see people in your division less, which, I mean, I guess it's good for fans because you get to see a variety of different teams. But I think ultimately you should definitely, and I think it's still the case, you should definitely play more teams against teams in your division. Because, I mean, if you're fighting for that division, it would only make sense that you're facing that division more. But, yeah, I kind of like interleague play. It gives a different variety. I don't think it's as special now with you facing every team. You know, it's not as special. But, I mean, it's all about money. Everybody wants to see the superstars from teams that you don't normally get to see either come to your city, and see, that's the thing is with this new way they got now, they alternate each year. Like if you faced a team that you've never played before in their city, next year they come to your city, and it just goes back and forth. And I don't want to bore you with all that. During this month, another thing is the Milwaukee Brewers, which are always leading our division now, the NL Central. So obviously I hate them. But this was the last year they were in the American League. They would move to the National League the following year, which I wish wouldn't have happened. But anyway, the top teams in the American League at that time were Baltimore Orioles and Seattle Mariners. And for the National League, it was the Atlanta Braves, because of course the 90's and the Braves, and the Colorado Rockies. But yeah, that's kind of what was going on with baseball. Again, other sports I'm not as big of a fan of, but at this time there was 2 sports where their playoffs and their championships were starting. The NBA playoffs started in April, and of course the Bulls would beat the Jazz in the finals 4-2. That was when Michael Jordan unretired after his baseball career didn't quite pan out. But it's like, okay, I'll just go back to the NBA, win another championship. I wish everything was that easy. But one I didn't talk about last week is the NHL. I enjoy going to see hockey. Like when I was in Cincinnati, I enjoyed going to see the Cincinnati Cyclones downtown, and going to see the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks at the Cincinnati Gardens, which sadly got torn down. But as far as like watching it on TV, I never really got into it. I know there's definitely a couple people that are watching this that are huge fans and won't be happy to hear this and probably already know this, but that was the year the Detroit Red Wings swept the Philadelphia Flyers 4-0 in the Stanley Cup. That's it. Probably don't want to remember this month and year. But we'll move on a little bit NASCAR, because like I talked about them last week. I kind of want to keep people updated what was going on then. Jeff Gordon would end up winning his 2nd Cup championship that year. And this month, he actually, April 97, he won Bristol and Martinsville. And Jeff Burton won Texas. So those were the NASCAR races of that month. And I said, I'm not going to add every sport. I'm not going to give you the golf results of 1992. Because if you know George Carlin, watching golf is like watching flies. I ain't going to say it. But anyway, I know there's some people that like golf. I don't care for it. But anyway, on that note, I'll wind up the episode this week. Hope I can get your thoughts and comments of what you liked, what you didn't like. I definitely want some feedback so I know kind of how to proceed in the future. Do you like more of the historical stuff? Do you want to hear more personal stories? Just whatever you want to leave. Like, check out next week. Will that be that bonus episode coming out Halloween 9 in the morning? My top 50 horror movies of all time. And the day before that will be next week's episode. We're going to be going back to 1994 yet again, 2 months prior to last week's episode, September 94. Because like I said, I put this in the random thing, and that's what came up. So we're going to be going back to 1994 again. And I mean, who knows what you might hear the following week. It might be 1990. It might be 1999. I try to, like I said, I don't want to go linear because I don't want people to get bored. I want to kind of jump around like I'm doing. I think I kind of like that format. But just anyway, let me know any comments you have. Thank you for checking me out here, whether you're watching me on Facebook, YouTube, or listening to me on Spotify. Wherever you get this, thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.